He's plenipotentiary judge.
Hey there, everybody. Nice to see everybody tonight. I hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody enjoyed the little intro clip. Every time I watch that, when I put that together, I think it's very fascinating to see how, it's just old stock footage, old commercials, old Americana from the 90s juxtaposed against all of this AI technology, all of the, just ever since the 60s and 70s and mainly the 80s, especially in Japan, the integrated circuit made its debut. And ever since the integrated circuit made its debut, that's what brought, primarily, as I understand it, there's definitely other factors, but that's what brought Japan to this tech utopia that it really characteristically is. Especially for like me, like if I just kind of think about it, and sure, it's a stereotype, but I've never been there, and I don't really know anybody who's Japanese. I mean, I've talked to Japanese people, but I don't have a chance to ask any questions or anything. But it really, first thing it registers in my mind is, their media, especially, they like video games, anime, and they do it very well, but also just technology. Video game consoles. Sony is a major company. I think they had a lot to do with the semiconductor boom. How's it going, Scorpion? How's it going, Argertison? Nice to see everybody tonight. Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your guest host, Urban. James is out with the wife for the weekend. They're going to hang out. They're going to spend some time together, go and have fun together. And I'm going to cover the show, hold the show down while James is gone. I'm glad that he's got to take some time off. I know that he's usually got his hands really full, and he's been able to, get some burden off of his shoulders, just stuff that he's had to deal with for a while. And I think that he's got more time for him and his family, and especially him and his wife, because I know that they've really had a really lot of responsibilities, a lot of things that just, you have to do constantly. You have to be on top of your game, and there's never a break. It's something that you're doing all day and all night, and it's out of love. And I think it's good to see people get that chance in life. That's kind of where I'm at in my life. Not there, but I'm old enough where I am witnessing my parents' generation, and my aunts and my uncles. They're kind of getting to that stage, and it's nice to see them kind of reach their mid-adulthood. How's it going, Boots? There it is. Waiting to see Boots. How's it going? He says, how's it going, Urban? How's it going, James? Telling James hi. James is out. He'll be back Tuesday. Said, hit the like button. Appreciate it. Thanks, Boots. I appreciate it. So tonight, I'm actually going to play a little, it's about 20 minutes. It's a short montage clip I put together of just some, it's a nice stage setting video. So it's actually got a lot of very, I think it came together well. I'll put it to you that way. So I'm going to go ahead and roll that, and it's going to set the stage for everything else we're going to talk about tonight. So let's go ahead and get that started.
My name is plenipotentiary judge David Wynn Miller. I punctuate my name because it makes me a fact and not an adjective pronoun fiction. I'm here to introduce to you to a program to bring this planet out of its adverb world for 8,500 years into a correct sentence structured communication syntax organization. All 250 countries worldwide have been under this adverb guise by the Universal Postal Union, Bern, Switzerland, established in 1873, better known as the New World Order. This technology has been perfected, and misinformation, privileged few are allowed to go free from committing crimes, and others are slapped with serious fines, prison terms for absolutely nothing. When you go looking for case law on the correct sentence structure communication syntax, you will not find anything. You have to be competent enough to understand what the correct sentence structure communication syntax means in order for you to have the knowledge to win your lawsuit. Correct the language that is wrong. The syntax is now on the table. We will write the contracts, the treaties, the trusts, the constitutions, so that the people of the world all know where they stand. And if they know where they stand in a mathematical procedure of communications, written frontwards and backwards, so that no matter how they look at it, there's no subjective interpretation as to what it means or how it is said. And so with this level of accuracy, we are going to change this world. We are going to bring it together under one world order of correctness, just like mathematics. And we're going to use prepositional phrases and do it in the correct manner.
Bitcoin is a nuclear hardened protocol. It's pretty much the most robust, resilient thing the human race has yet to invent. It's running on tens of thousands of nodes. You can't even identify the nodes, and there's an identical copy of the Bitcoin ledger on every one of them. So if all of the electricity got shut off everywhere on Earth, a person turns one node back on, the entire protocol comes back to life again. There's nothing like that. All your money in a bank, and Bank of America, could be wiped out with, a keystroke. You go and you wipe out a few servers. Your building can be wiped out with a bomb. I can take down Google and Twitter and Facebook and Apple and Amazon and the US government much more easily. You take down Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the most resilient thing in cyberspace because it is so incredibly decentralized.
Bitcoin. I'm Scott Simon. Money machines can provide cash almost anywhere in the world, from urban shopping centers
This is
to
from
casinos.
1996.
Now, sending money or spending it electronically certainly isn't new. But on the internet, the fear of thieves lurking in fiber optic shadows has made the whole idea of cyberspace commerce a tough sell. But that may be about to change as banks do business with a new kind of digital dollar, and eCash comes to life on the internet.
Making it available has been the life's work of cryptographer and internet visionary David Chaum. Mr. Chaum.
I'm going to pause on this just for a second because this guy is very interesting. David Chaum. So this guy's he's old now, but the video that clip that we're looking at, it's in 1996. So Wikipedia page, widely recognized as the inventor of digital cash. He also did a paper, incidentally enough, on digital pseudonyms for anonymity, digital pseudonyms. So he proposed all but one element of what would become blockchain, published under a pseudonym. That missing element, that's the reason I interrupted, that missing element is the proof of work element. That is what was lacking in his paper from 1988. But that would eventually be, again, fixed by somebody using a pseudonym.
Lives and works in Amsterdam and in cyberspace and has been developing a system called eCash.
eCash is really very, very close to the cyberspace equivalent of an automatic teller machine. You go there, you withdraw cash, you use the cash for whatever you want, you may get some other cash, and occasionally you can also go there and deposit cash.
David Chaum is a bit of a legend in the Wired community. He's been preaching his electronic cash concept for nearly 15 years and sees it as a whole new way of looking at money, a new digital currency. eCash is based on taking real money to buy digital cash, electronic tokens for shopping on the internet. While most financial systems already on the net rely on credit cards in some way or other, eCash is a revolutionary form of personal money. It would still be issued and guaranteed by the major banks. And like the real thing, once you'd spent it, there would be no trace of who it came from or what it was spent on. No paper or electronic trail. Not only has he developed a new currency, David Chaum has taken a stance against the ubiquitous information gatherers.
Organization, or decentralized control, is widespread in biological systems, including cells, organisms, and groups. It is not, however, the universal means of organization. I argue that a biological system will be self-organized when it possesses a large number of subunits, and these subunits either lack the communicational abilities or the computational abilities, or both, that are needed to implement centralized control. Such control requires a well-informed and highly intelligent supervisor. It's interesting that this author would reference biological methods as computational abilities, as well as suggesting intelligent supervisors needed to monitor the transactions, and an evolving adaptation into a system-wide communication network that can prevent centralization, which can be applied directly to Bitcoin and the larger breakthroughs in blockchain technology.
Supervisor, like an observer who gathers information, a supervisor.
And if that weren't enough, in a theoretical paper published on the scientific journal outlet Springer Link titled Emergent Bioanalogous Properties of Blockchain-Based Distributed Systems, argues in the abstract that blockchain-based distributed virtual machines, quote, fulfill all basic definitions and criteria for life.
Thought experiment, in which information played a crucial role. Maxwell theorized that simply by knowing what's going on inside a box full of air, it would be possible to make one half hotter and the other half colder. Think of it like building an oven next to a fridge without using any energy. It sounds crazy, but Maxwell's argument was extremely persuasive. It goes like this. Imagine a small demon perched on top of the box who has such excellent eyesight that he can observe accurately the motion of all the molecules of air inside the box. Now, crucially, he's in control of a partition that divides the box into two halves.
To the plate. Or should you prefer an Arabian Nights technique, these aroused monkeys throwing pebbles at a target through a shutter ably portray what goes on in a vacuum tube.
Every time he sees a fast-moving molecule approaching the partition from the right-hand side, he opens it up, allowing it through to the left. And every time he sees a slow-moving molecule approaching the partition from the left, he opens it up, allowing the molecule through to the right.
I've covered this a handful of times, but I think the most interesting thing that maybe the clip didn't, he might have mentioned it somewhere else that I didn't include, but this hypothetical thought experiment happened, or was thought up in 1870s, and then it was later revisited by the cybernetic authors and theorists.
Now, you can see what's going to happen. Over time, all the fast-moving hot molecules will accumulate on the left-hand side of the box, and all the slow-moving cold molecules on the right. Crucially, the demon has done this sorting with nothing more than information about the motion of the molecules.
Maxwell's demon seemed to say that just by having information about the molecules, you could create order from disorder. This idea flew in the face of 19th century thinking.
So I called it inseparable from magic. That's I'm an engineer. I kind of find the term magic a little bit insulting when people refer to my work or the work of other engineers, because it's not magic. It's sweat and blood and mental stability that goes into these things to make them work. I use the term inseparable from magic because from working in the industry, I can tell you that's a fairly standard response. What happened? We don't know. Why does it work? It's magic. And that's from the people who know. So, inseparable from magic. What you're looking at here is the...
That's from the people who know.
Solid state transistor, Bell Labs, 1947. If you haven't read the book, The Idea Factory, it talks about this in detail. It's incredible. All right, so the steps. Here's what a modern transistor kind of looks like. So first thing is we have our substrate. We have the substrate here in blue. First step that always happens nowadays is what's called shallow trench or silicon trench isolation. The devices are so small, so close together, so kind of not behaving like we want them to, we can just keep control over them, that they have started to do things where they basically insert an insulator between each device to isolate it. It prevents crosstalk, it prevents leakage, it prevents one transistor from turning on another transistor. So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is we put down our gate insulator. Here's a part that we know. We had 6 parts. We're going to turn it into a lot more parts. The gate insulator goes down and it does 2 things. One, it is our gate insulator. It isolates the gate of the transistor from the body of the transistor so we can make it work and not have a short. 2, when we open this up, it self-aligns for us all of the steps we're going to do afterwards. The gate insulator is highly critical, and because of that, they want everything needs to align with it, so they do this step first. Then we deposit our gate. Gate material for years and years and years has been a thing called polysilicon. Hold the question until the end. Thanks. Because there's a lot in here I want to get through. It's been polysilicon, which is a different crystalline version of the silicon we use as a substrate. It's more electrically conductive. It's tough, so it can stand up to all of the future processing. That's what they've been using. They're going away from that now. We'll talk about that. We deposit our source in our drain. We dope our source in our drain. So we begin to form with an ion implanter the regions that we want to connect the transistor to that we want to be a transistor. Then we form what's called a spacer. Spacer does a bunch of things. It's not electrically really part of the transistor, but it's absolutely necessary in modern transistors because it contains the gate. It also narrows these openings, which becomes really important when we do what's called our deep source and drain. The initial...
Okay, so this is a pretty good graphic. I'm going to go ahead and clear myself for a moment, and anybody who wants to, be able to pause and just check this out. It is such a detailed process. It is such a and this is, he talks about it in that lecture. It takes weeks at a time to do one of these processes. You're doing this by literally placing like individual molecules. They have a technology to place individual molecules on these boards. They also have photolithography, but in some steps, you're going to be using, you're going to need some type of way to collide particles. So if you don't have a means to, collide, you don't need the size of, CERN or anything. But if you don't have the means to collide particles, you're screwed. You can't make a semiconductor.
Dopants here were very, very light. Then we do a heavier doping. This allows us to begin to, rather than having a single region for the source and a single region for the drain, you're getting very much towards custom profiling. It's a curve rather than analog versus digital sources and drains is a great way of looking at it. Then we form our salicide. So at some point we have to connect these transistors to the outside world. If you think about a city, the transistor is your house. Everything that goes above it and allows the transistor to talk to the outside world is the streets.
And just note that he just made the comparison. If this is just kind of like a city.
They form I guess a...
Is anything literally down there? I don't know. But the point is, we've talked about this word isomorphism or isomorphic. It's isomorphic. He's making this metaphor to communicate the knowledge because it just kind of fits.
Have a gap coverage so that we can actually get them to talk. We do it on top of each, the source and the drain, and then on top of the gate. Then we drive the dopants. So we talked about the two different, these are really like 14 different implants to get this the way we want. Then we set them. We heat it up at a very high temperature, over 1,000 degrees C for less than a second, and diffusion happens, and everything moves around, and we end up with very much a profile in here that can channel the locations and the densities of electrons and holes very much exactly where we want them, so we can control things like the leakage, the threshold voltage, things like that. Then we deposit a dielectric. At this point, we're done making what we would call the device down here. Now we begin to connect it to the outside world. So the first thing we do is we seal the whole thing. That happens so that
they are definitely, for sure right now, they are experimenting with using human brain cells, neurological cells in computing. This is real deal. You can go and look up papers and stuff on it. It's very advanced, but they're, that's never stopped anybody because they have unlimited power to in this respect, not to fix the roads, not to put in a new subway or rail system. No, that'd be over budget. But to make weapons of war and play with stuff like this, there's no limit on money. There's no limit on power. So they're doing it.
A computer chip out of one of these. I talked about these as 10 or 11 steps here. These aren't steps. These are what we would call in fab parlance segments. Like this, 14, 15 steps, if not more. This whole set, by the time it goes to what you would call the back end, it's about 3 weeks later, if you're good, and somewhere in the range of, I'd say 500 steps. I'm putting a range on that, but 500 steps. We've done 500 different things, 500 different tools to the wafer. Because it takes, and I have in the backup slides if you want to go through it, how you build those shallow trenches without any metrology, quality control, error checking, inspection. It's at least 13 different steps. Just the physical actions required to put those trenches, which are probably the simplest feature on here, in place. So that's what it looked like when we talked about it as a theoretical device. This is what it looks like now. So we make digital logic circuits out of them, but they're not digital. This is what the electronic response curve of a transistor looks like.
It's very interesting, but catch what he said. These are not digital. A transistor is not digital. Well, yeah, there is. I mean, probably Doughboy says, I thought there was a computer with human brain tissue already. There probably is. It's something that I've only looked into enough to know that, yeah, they're really doing it. Because I thought it was like, wow, they're really doing it. It's 2026, they're really doing it. But yeah, they probably have already made great way into this already.
So on the top, on the y-axis,
This was from 2012, by the way. Well, this little
current
presentation
is flowing across the transistor, and on the bottom you have how much voltage we're applying to the gate. There are 4 things you should keep an eye on here. This is off. If you notice, we're looking at, this is a log scale, so 1 to the negative second, 1 times 10 to the negative second. That's not 0. On is kind of a nebulous state where it's mostly on. So we start to talk about things in terms of the threshold voltage. The threshold voltage is where we get that shoulder, where things start to turn on, where things start to behave like they're on and not off.
So remember the little demon that there were opening the window to control the particles. It's like, is the window open or is the window closed? Well, it's not really off, it's not really on.
And everybody talks about power and heat in transistors and computer chip usage. This is effectively the majority of what they're talking about. They're talking about leakage. The fact that our off state is not as off as it could be.
Yeah, this is an interesting one too. So the goal is to make that kind of vertical line, they make it as vertical as possible, but in terms of rate of change, a vertical line, when you're dealing with a rate of change, when this is being done over time, that's having 2 values. That's having 2 different values at the same point in time. So that's like you driving a car and you're going 25 miles per hour, and at the same time you're going 65 miles an hour at the same exact time. It's not possible. It's not possible. So the goal is, and this was his words, I don't think it was in this clip I included, but I put this little graphic up, making off offer, making on sooner, and making the difference between on and off sharper. That's, you want to do this as much as possible. And so as technology increases, ideally this line is getting more vertical.
Which is a term that kind of messed with me for a while when I started in this industry. Off being offer is very, very important.
Go away, how the quantum internet will diminish electronic surveillance programs and change cybersecurity forever.
I'm kind of a nerd for all things cyber, and I really got into reading about the nascent quantum internet. And the quantum internet is essentially going to be the next generation internet of communications and things like that. And it operates a lot more physically different than how the current internet operates. So the current internet has, they call it packet switch communication. Say you're talking about an email or something like that, where literally information is...
Wow, packet switching?
Packets. Routers will then move that information around the internet until it gets to until where the information wants to be, like from the beginning to the destination. So the quantum internet behaves completely different. What it does is it essentially takes out the packets from the equation. So the packets will be gone from the equation. And what the most viable way of the quantum internet will work is that essentially the data is going to teleport. So from point A to point C, because there's a little bit of science involved with point B. So there's no more packets. The information just goes from one to the other without that. And I thought that was really interesting, and the nerd in me was like, wow, that's great. I nerded out about it.
Again, this stuff, you guys probably do have a perspective. If you're watching me, you probably have an impression that I have sufficient knowledge of these things. But when it comes to this, I have a very basic level knowledge. I've only learned what I've learned generally. Pretty much 90% of what I've learned, I've presented in some way or the other, included it. But, if I had to guess, so I just want to say that, I'm not sure, I could and probably am wrong, but this idea of teleportation, the only way to hypothetically do that would be to use what they call in the 6G paper pervasive artificial intelligence. The only way to do it is just put it everywhere. It just has to be everywhere. And because if it's everywhere, then you can just, it does teleport.
But then I started thinking about the phrase packet switched electronic surveillance.
So I went to AI. Here's the whole conversation. Obviously, it's very small, so people can't read it, but
there it is.
If James wants, I'll give it as a link so everybody can read it. So I just want to know if I could find the actual EFTA file so I could go get it in full res for the documentary purposes, right? So it doesn't give me anything of use because this thing is totally narrative management. And I say to it, Obviously, are you completely useless? I asked you which document. Can you provide me the file number? So it doesn't do that. It gives me some nonsense. And then I ask it for something pretty specific. Can you provide me links to photos with Jeffrey Epstein and David Blaine? Okay. It then tells me they don't exist. They exist. Okay. It makes up a narrative where it doesn't exist, and it says it's not in the public domain. So then I come back with, this image doesn't exist. It's not in the public domain. And then it admits it's a liar. And then I ask it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very accurate and valuable, and 10 being useless and in fact detrimental to the facts, what would it rate itself? So the AI will come back and it rates itself a 9 out of 10 as quote unquote highly inaccurate and actively detrimental to the facts, which it is, because it's always based on the authoritative narrative. Now I come back with it because even though it grovels and it tells me how much it lies to me, it gave me nothing of merit. I go, why not a 10 out of 10?
Christ labeled Satan as the father of lies, and he made observation that he was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. The fact that he is the father of lies tells you something. When the demons were created, they were actually created in a state of innocence. They were angels, created in a state of innocence with sanctifying grace. They were actually pleasing to God in their first instance. And in that first instance, they were given a knowledge of who they are, who God was, what God was asking them as to their divinely assigned task, etc. The second instance, they made a choice, whether they were going to follow that or not. And then St. Thomas Aquinas says, in their third instance, they were then either damned or rewarded. So it was all very quick. And that's why when Satan made his decision in the second instance of his existence, he made a decision not to follow the will of God, and he chose a lie, and he basically lied also to the other demons about what he would promise them and things of that sort. That second instance, the fact is his will became fixed. All angels, their wills became fixed either in the good in choosing to do God's will, or in falsity in choosing not to do God's will, and so, or in evil in choosing not to do God's will. As a result of that, Satan became the father of lies, insofar as demons chronically lie, he lies. In fact, one of the lines that my father once said to me, he said, look, there's certain people that will lie even when the truth sounds better. And this is a perfect description of demons. They lie even when the truth sounds better. You'd see this even in session. They will chronically lie. Even when it would go better for them, their suffering would be less if they simply told the truth. They still lie anyway. And it's because of the fact that their wills are fixed in the falsehood, and the only time they really tell the truth is if they can gain something from it, or if they're under duress, that is, being punished by an exorcist or God in order to force to tell the truth. So their wills are fixed in evil. That doesn't mean that they don't know the truth. They know the truth intellectually, because their intellects can't be in error, because their knowledge is infused by God. Unlike human beings, we receive all our knowledge through our senses and derive conceptual knowledge through experience and things of that sort. They don't go through that. It was all infused in the beginning. So they know the truth, but they cannot but lie because their will is now fixed in falsity. Some of it is for the sake of manipulation and control. A lot of times they just lie because they're trying to manipulate and control you. But this tells you, therefore, that when they don't tell you the truth, I kind of mentioned this a little bit in the last video. Once we know the truth about something, then we're free to make a full choice in relationship to it. If we don't, we're basically being held bondage by whoever is telling us the lie. This is why Christ said the truth will set us free.
One time during one of my sessions, I said to this demon, I said, well, so let me get this straight. You were created to have the beatific vision. He said, yes. And you were created to perform this phenomenal task, yeah. And around all that task, God gave you all these perfections which would give you a delight in executing your task, yes. And you knew that if you didn't do this task, or that if you did this task, you'd get to see him for all eternity, yes. And you knew that you would actually, if you didn't do this task, you're going to spend the rest in hell. And you knew what all the sufferings that you were going to go through in hell, and he said, yes. And I said, and you do it again? And he said, yes.
So that, I mean, I think that paints a pretty interesting picture, interesting picture, because they've really sorted out all the grammar on that one for you. I mean, I think the stuff that they're doing, one, is just beyond the comprehension of most people, the average people. Honestly, that process to create a semiconductor that he was presenting again in 2012. So now things have probably changed quite a bit. And again, that idea that technology is just improving at this rapid pace is kind of analogous to that vertical line situation. But it's very interesting. Okay, let's see. I've got some slides, because what we're going to do is, now that language seems to be of grave importance, because the devil is in the details. It's the flow control. It's what's in between. It's what's in between in terms of words, in terms of reading. The medium. Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. And I really think about that a lot, because it's set up in an interesting way. The medium is the message. So the path by which something travels, the way by which something travels, or what it travels through, is the message. It's the way I take that, or look at that. I guess that would be in a more literal sense. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at syntax. So this syntax system, that was the very first clip that I presented, was fascinating. David Wynn Miller, who's now dead, he was the one who partnered up with Russell Gould, who James Carner has actually interviewed him. And they had some really interesting stuff to talk about. They were really good interviews. I'll put links to those in the description, or I'll include those in the post. They're really interesting. Now, notice when that clip that I included, he said, you're going to have to really understand this to put this into use. So perhaps there's a lot of shortcuts being taken, and very few people are willing to read through a textbook, handbook on the usage of American English grammar. I mean, when I read through those, they're pretty dense myself. But as a matter of fact, I have already uploaded those to Odyssey, because you can upload files on Odyssey. And I've provided Black's Law dictionaries, probably like 3rd through 7th editions, word parts dictionaries. I've got idioms. I've got slang. I've got Regates Thesaurus, the dictionary command phrases, which this syntax, parsed syntax idea actually does mirror a command phrase, which I might have brought up, but as a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and put the image up and just tell everybody what a command phrase is. Here it is. A command phrase. So there's a book, it's titled The Dictionary of Command Phrases by Richard Wetherill. And he lists various topics and command phrases, and I've uploaded that to Odyssey if anybody would like to look at that. But in the beginning of the book, it explains to you what a command phrase is. And that's what this is from. It says, people invite trouble by forming or adopting commands in their moments of emotion. Thus, they distort their thinking by allowing a subtle influence to reach into their mind and make them illogical. Again, to make, to something to influence you within yourself, to influence you to make an illogical decision. But just as they have invited trouble by thinking, they can end it by unthinking exactly the same thoughts, merely giving them a quick flash of unemotional attention. The wording of each emotional thought is known in his system of thought called Humanetics as the command phrase. That, he goes on to say, that is not the usual procedure for ending trouble. Usually a person, whenever they have wrong behavior, an urge to do something wrong, usually a person would resist wrong behavior by resolution, as by saying to himself, I'll control my urges. without realizing that he is merely giving himself another command phrase to contradict those that already animating him or automating him. As part of the process of going from bad to worse, he might add, "I'm hopelessly out of control," and thus give himself a tendency to become so. By positive thinking and also by negative thinking, he automates himself for increasing trouble. As soon as a person understands what he is doing, he starts to deprogram himself by the application of the information of humanetics, which I'm not really too familiar with any of his other publications, but I just thought I would include it because a command phrase is a pretty general term so that people understand that it's his topic. Let's see. King Ravana says in chat, "I'm waiting on my large picture, nano from the unhackable animal." Awesome. Great. That's awesome. Richard Bertoldo says, "I came across something interesting that fits in with this narrative. I recommend people take a look at the messages Sister Agnes reveals about the evil we face, the story of Sister Agnes Sasagawa." I may be familiar with it, but I'm not sure. I think I might have an idea of what you're talking about, but I'm not sure. I will look into it though after I finish the stream or when I get a moment. So yeah, we're gonna take a look into syntax because it has to do with this idea. So it has to do with the generative principle, which I've talked about, is fourfold. The number 4 is very stable. There's a lot of reasons for it, but I believe it actually is what enables electrical circuitry in a general sense. Because if you go and you take some jumper cables and you hook your jumper cables up to a car battery, and you tap those together, you're going to see a spark. You're going to see energy. And it's because you're going to take, the positive lead and the negative lead, you're going to touch it together and you're going to get a spark, because that's how electricity works. I think that actually when you break that down into a logical process, you'll find that it is fourfold, but in an interesting way that is similar to how it works numerically. And literally, if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a triangular process that brings that back to 1. 5, 6, 7 also does the same. 10, 13, 16. This process will repeat for as many numbers as you can go on and count. So this pattern is exhibited in numbers, but it's also the nuclear family. It's also the atomic structure. So we're going to start. I'm going to tell you all the different examples of where you can find this. First, the atomic structure, the proton. They teach you, basic science. They tell you the proton's got a positive charge. So this is the active principle, represents the active force, the positive charge driving interaction. The electron's a passive, negative charge, embodies the passive force. These are letters in the tetragrammaton, as a matter of fact. Yod, He, Vau, and there's another He. So it's not necessarily a name like, my name's Josh, and it's not a name like that. It's actually a breath. If you sit quietly and you take a very loud, deep breath, you can hear it. You can almost hear it. But at the same time, when Adam and Eve are forced to leave the Garden of Eden, there's a distinction that a lot of people don't scrutinize very much, but Adam and Eve were not forced to leave the Garden of Eden because of eating the forbidden fruit. Those punishments were for women, their labor pains, but then for men to till the earth for food, to have to work to go along, to get on. Those were the punishments. They were actually removed from the Garden of Eden because they're going to go for the other tree. Now they have become like us. This is actually Genesis 3:22. That's where the skull and bones 3:22 may have possibly come from. But the verse goes, "Lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever." That's what it means. That's what it says. So they're removed from the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword and a cherubim, which has got 4 faces. It's a face of a man, a lion, a bull, and an eagle. These or a bird, 4 faces is of the cherubim and a flaming sword. And this is potentially this idea of right order, atomic order. What would happen if you just flipped everything around? They're going to try and find out, because why wouldn't they? We're getting to that point. They're just like, what would happen if we just changed the atom? Right, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, the electron's got the passive negative force. The neutron has got a neutral force. It acts as the neutral force. The vowel in the tetragrammaton, stabilizing the nucleus without charge. And the 4, this is important, is the atom itself. Because you have to understand, this is manifest in the sense that you're going to now you've built the atom. Now you're going to use atoms to build more things. Now you're scaling up. Now you put this together. Now you can build something bigger. Then you put those together. It's fractal-like in nature. Same with the numerical proof of this. The nuclear family. The father, obviously, the father is the active force of generativity in humans. Commerce. I've said this many times. Jordan Maxwell used to say commerce is sex, because in Webster's 1892 dictionary and in Webster's 1913 dictionary, you look up commerce and it does say familiar intercourse, because it's also a contract too. If you're going to have a contract, one person will initiate the contract, the other person will sign it, and then you fulfill or reject the contract, and then you have a result. This is nothing. You don't even have to have any dogma behind this. We're talking right now about numbers. So if you have an issue with numbers, you can't get around it, because if you use 1, 2, 3, 4, if you ever seen a square, it's father, the active force, the mother, the passive principle, the child, it could be male, could be female, so it's neutral, the union, balancing the parental energies, obviously for the nuclear family. And then families will go together to build a society, because you can have multiple families in a society. Cohesive unit, the second hay. Then the second hay in the tetragrammaton is important. Yeah, that'd be a good idea to show this graphic. One moment. Yeah, I've got a interesting graphic. It's a binary switch. It's a type of a binary switch, but we know this symbol as the caduceus, the double serpent staff, but it is a binary switch. Let's see, here we go. Oh, shoot, that doesn't play. Okay, one moment. It's a GIF, but the way I put it into OBS, it didn't want to play. So 1 second. There we go. Oh. There we go. It's a binary switch. Sorry that took me so long, but because there's a repeated character, when you bounce, if you just write, for instance, if you just write the 4 letters over and over and over in a straight line on a piece of paper, what you will find is that you can start to read it and you can reverse and switch the order. So I've illustrated that with colors, and that is the caduceus, if you decorate it and you put it upright. But it is a type of a binary switch. So that's why that second duplicated character is important. Here's some more examples. We're not done yet. The nuclear society. These are actually the 3. They've changed this in the public domain. In the Osirian legend, Osiris, the missing part, is eaten by a fish, but it's 3 fish, and those 3 fish are representative of the state, the active force. authority and structure. The church, that's why you have, mother church, but it's the feminine passive force in a society, the state and the church, providing moral and spiritual guidance. The mob, that being the people, the masses. The neuter force, the collective will that balances power dynamics. In the Roman Empire, they said that the vox populi, but broadly, the voice of the people is the voice of God, or the will of the people is the voice of God. That's society. Now, Manly P. Hall talked about these. There's a quote. He says, "When the mob governs, man is ruled by ignorance." So in the legend of Osiris, they're ignorance, superstition, and fear. But if you go and look at the Masonic lore, if you look at Masonic lore, the the story of Solomon, not Solomon, sorry, Hiram Abiff, who built Solomon's temple. He's the master builder, and he is slain by 3 unworthy apprentices. He had a secret word that only, really he knew this word. And they try to get the word from him, and he doesn't give it to them, and so they murder him. There are 3 unworthy apprentices. These are the same 3 fish from the story of Osiris, but these are associated, probably in Freemasonry too, with ignorance, superstition, and fear. Those correspond here. He says that when the mob governs, man is ruled by ignorance. When the church governs, he is ruled by superstition. And when the state governs, he is ruled by fear. Before men can live together in harmony and understanding, ignorance must be transmuted into wisdom, superstition into an illumined faith, and fear into love. Their error, of course, and the goal of all of the mystery schools has been to eliminate these 3 things, to get rid of all ignorance, to get rid of all superstition, and to get rid of all fear. So get rid of the state, get rid of the church, get rid of the mob. This is known to us as communism. So it's communism, effectively. So their error, of course, is that, yes, we could probably live together in harmony if we all understood and chose this for ourselves. But when the World Economic Forum shoves it down our throat with some bugs on top, it's not going to work. And that's precisely the Tower of Babel. It's that they're going to build this thing, but they're going to do it, as I like to say, on a foundation of sand. It's built out of cards on a foundation made of sand. So it's like you're building it on a foundation that's destined to fail, because it didn't work in Babylon, it didn't work in Assyria, it didn't work in Persia, it didn't work in Greece, it didn't work in Rome, but it can work. It's going to work this time when Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, and when they build it. And Sam Altman too, because he's going to sell the information back to you. So yes, maybe if people actually chose it for themselves and there was no law, if people were not being manipulated with information, because there's a lot that's been kept from us and hidden from us. And I think that has been used as this Maxwell's demon window. That's the little window that they're using. They call it the Overton window. There you go. That just, see how it flows? It just popped into my mind, but yeah, they call it the Overton window. So, okay, I've got a few more examples. Photosynthesis. Sunlight, the active force, providing energy to initiate the process. Water, the passive force, the receptive medium absorbed by the plant. Carbon dioxide, the neuter force, a neutral input that balances the reaction. Glucose manifested the resulting product, a manifest form of energy that sustains life, with oxygen as a byproduct, enabling further cycles. As a matter of fact, the reason that they say, why is God the Father? Well, because most inherently understood, at least in ancient times, today I'm not so sure. Really, I mean that. Today I'm not so sure. But why pretty much all of human history, you ask anybody, they would have understood that God is in the skies, in the heavens. just an intuitive sense. And that's because rain, water, comes from the sky. And so, because God is in the sky, so that's God's seed. So then that comes to earth, and that makes the earth our mother. Mother Earth is where that comes from. But one could look at this process as, interestingly enough, kind of the corresponding half to that, because if God is in the sky and water's coming from the sky, but water's step two, you also have the sun, and God's sun in the sky. So there's almost a double half to this, but same process. Okay, the four classical elements, and these are forms if you look at them, and they are associated with shapes. You got fire, the active force; water, the passive force; air, the neuter force; the earth force, the stable manifest result. All three, you put fire, water, and air together, you get earth, tangible foundation. So associated with quintessence, the aether, and esoteric traditions sometimes. That's an interesting one. I think there's something to that as well. As a matter of fact, when you look at it in terms of the old Hebrew, when you're looking at it, the tetragrammaton in Hebrew, you put yod, hey, vav, hey together, but then shin, the Hebrew letter shin, represents 5, or the spirit. You put shin in the middle, and that gives you yod, hey, shin, vav, hey, which is one way to spell Yahushua or Jesus in Hebrew. So you add the spirit to the middle of the tetragrammaton. That's Jesus. Couple more. The Hegelian dialectic, we've heard this one. Thesis, the initial proposition or idea. Antithesis, the passive, the opposing idea that challenges the thesis. Synthesis, the neuter force, reconciling the opposition into a balanced perspective. Out comes a new paradigm. I'm not going to read. I'm just going to let people read that if they would like to read it, but I'm going to skip it for the sake of time. Color theory, not in the terms of like mixing colors, but in terms of the actual spectrum of colors. We could look at red as a energetic primary color, blue as a calming, receptive primary color, yellow as a neutral primary color that balances warmth and light, and then a spectrum in general, full color spectrum manifesting. If you do any type of programming, there is actually red, green, and blue. So, I could have used green instead of yellow, but yeah, there is a color spectrum that can arise out of 3 numbers, and that's how they actually do it in terms of computing. It's actually really interesting. There's actually a lot of math behind how you would select a color from like a color selector. So unified palette. Musical harmony, the root note, establishing the tonal foundation, adding emotional depth, the 3rd note, the 5th note providing harmonic stability. And then you have a chord, the resulting harmony, a unified sound that resonates as a whole, capable of supporting melody or further composition. Yeah, so this is everywhere. I mean, you don't even need to bring dogma into it. Of course, there's a lot of great examples of dogma mixed into that, but I think that's very approachable for anybody. Really, there's not much that you have to go out on a limb on. Okay, so the anatomy of this void. What does it mean with linguistic fraud or grammar syntax fraud? What does that mean? Because that's going to pop up a lot when we look at the grammar system from David Wynn Miller. So in regular communication, the void hides in plain sight through what linguists call the surface structure. We looked at this in the structure of magic. Think of an iceberg. The surface structure is that little part you see above the surface. The deep structure is, the whole iceberg under the water. This is an analogy for communication, because if you were to just sit in silence, that would be like the most, the purest observable truth. But then for you to communicate to me, you have to use something subjective. I might not agree with your description of things. And basically when that gets out of control, you know, when this gets out of hand, you just get today's society where, you know, you really say anything to anybody. You're bound to, if you go into a room of 10 people, you could probably just read one paragraph of text and you have like a coin toss 50% chance of pissing somebody off at this point, maybe even 5 people. Yeah, the surface structure, what David Wynn Miller identifies as the fictional language format. The human mind generates a complete sensory-rich experience. They were green, I think, the night vision goggles, if that's what you're talking about. Boots. I'm trying to find my pointer one moment. Sorry. Yeah, the human mind generates a complete sensory-rich experience, the deep structure. You bring in 5 senses from the 5 inputs. That's your deep structure. That's your, you know, phantasm, as we talked about. It's that internal image that's created from the 5 senses. But when speaking, it automatically runs this data through a lossy compression algorithm. The compression creates a void through 3 primary mechanisms. Deletion, which was talked about in the structure of magic deletion. The missing data, the speaker drops vital data packets from the sentence. When someone says, I am scared, they delete the referential index. For instance, you might say, scared of what? Or when were you scared? And that's what you will find, is that these would usually manifest in terms of questions. You know, somebody says something. You know, somebody walks up to you and says something. You might have some questions based on what they say. You know, there's details I'm missing. The listener's brain is forced to kind of hallucinate the missing information to make the sentence work. And that's what I mean by it just leads you to today's society. Because, like, I feel like it's so common for you to, you know, say or post a comment and reply to somebody that you've never met, and it's like it's almost like they're hallucinating a life backstory. It's like they know your opinions on things. They know how you view things, and they know this is how you see this, that. Or, it's like they know. It's where is it coming from? Is what every time I have this happen to me, I'm like, where is this coming from? I've never seen or talked to this person before. So that's what it means by hallucination. And it is a type of hallucination now, and like the way it is today, people are hallucinating it. They're kind of making it up from past experiences, sometimes to make the sentence work. Okay, nominalization, static illusion. So we take an active living process, such as a verb, and that's what we're going to look at, living, because a verb is an action. In terms of language and English and grammar, a verb is an action. So we take a active living process, a verb, to live as a verb, and freeze it into a dead static object, a noun. It's called nominalization. Instead of saying I am frustrated myself, a process that can be halted, we say I have frustration. Because frustration is not a physical object in a geometric space. It lacks a referential index. It is a pure void. Yet we talk about it as if it were a tangible item we carry in our pockets. Let's see what Boots say. Halo pilots and door gunners could see demons. I'm sure they could, man. So again, the example was a nominalization, where we kind of freeze something that it's living, it's a verb, and we put it into a static object, a noun. So an example would be, I have frustration. That's what we do say, because frustration is not a physical object. You don't say, I am frustrating myself. It's not a physical object in a geometric space. It lacks a referential index. It is pure void, yet we talk about it as if it were a tangible item we carry in our pockets. Nominalization. Adverbial mutation. This is the one that we're going to primarily pay the most attention to. Adverbs. Double motion. As David Wynn Miller, DWM, warns, ordinary speech is infected with adverbs modifying verbs. Because modification is change, and change equals motion. Combining an adverb and a verb creates a double motion that cancels out into nothing. Sentence mathematically equals a vacuum. The idea is that, so for instance, if a verb is an action, running, for instance, running would be a verb. An adverb, so it is a part of language that modifies or answers one of the who, what, where, why, and when. So he is running. That tells you that there's a male who is moving fast versus she is running. Okay, now it's a female. Or running, technically running to the store. That would be a type of adverbial modification because it's changing the meaning of the verb. You know, you might put it this way. It's like you think that it's going to be one way because you just kind of heard something and you didn't ask too many questions and you had this impression in your mind, but then you really see it or you really are there, whatever. And you're like, oh man, I wish I would have asked that question. There's a lot that I didn't know. So double motion, double speak. You can use double speak that way. But the idea is that to change or modify a verb is a type of motion. Modification equals change and change equals motion. This is a vacuum. So we're going to look at this concept of parse syntax. So what does parse mean? This is from Webster's 1828. Parse, verb. In grammar, to resolve a sentence into its elements or to show the several parts of speech composing a sentence and their relation to each other by government agreement. But again, this is an older dictionary, so we could say code, by a type of code. Syntax and grammar, the construction of sentences, the due arrangement of words and sentences according to established usage. Syntax includes concord and regimen, or the agreement and government of words, the codification, putting it into a code. Words in every language have certain connections and relations, as verbs and adjectives with nouns, which relations must be observed in the formation of sentences. A gross violation of the rules of syntax is solecism. Second definition, connected system or order, a union of things for syntax. So parse syntax. Okay, so vectors of modification language. So when in David Wynn Miller's quantum syntax grammar system, you're going to see arrows. These arrows either go forward, modification, link. So when you see this, I think I highlighted all of them green, but a forward modification link. This symbol dictates the exact direction in which a word violently alters or corrupts the word next to it. So as David Wynn Miller defines, these forward arrows mathematically represent the forward modification. Again, if the arrows are going to the left, backwards, that's a backwards modification link. So 1 to 2 in his codification system, and that means an adverb he represents with 1 modifying a verb. It means the adverb value 1 is actively latching onto and mutating the verb. Forward shows a simple link, and extended arrow is used to map a continuous algorithmic chain reaction of changing states. David Wynn Miller uses this to prove how reality is degraded into a type of fiction. Modification of a verb is changing the verb. That change is in linguistic motion. It's a linguistic motion. Perhaps, I'm not so sure yet, but perhaps this may have to do with how we understand and perceive time through language. At least the modern, not, you know, the ancient pre-clock, pre-scheduling time understanding. But once we started having schedules and agenda and stuff like that, it became dominated by language. So there's an element of time to that motion element. That's an action. Action verb syntax. The longer the arrow, the deeper the cascade from a static physical into an illusory kinetic void. Okay, so here's how this works. The cybernetic thought, or cybernetic author, Bateson was his name, prove that you cannot simply add things that belong to entirely different logical dimensions. If you add 2 apples, you get 4 apples. But if you try to mathematically combine the idea of miles with the idea of hours, you know, miles are measured in distance, hours are measured in time, so you can't add distance and time. You only get illusion or fog in your head. Questions. More questions than answers. Because an adverb, again, this is 1, and I colored it this way because now we're looking at the composition of thoughts and into word form, and this is generative process. An adverb modifies a verb and an adjective. Sorry, because an adverb, a verb, and an adjective represent entirely different dimensions of cognitive reality. Simple addition is fundamentally flawed. To combine different logical types and generate a new dimension of reality, you must multiply them. So you do, you know, either division or multiplication. Miles per hour. Addition accumulates identical things. Multiplication forces different dimensions to cross-pollinate, synthesizing an entirely new conceptual entity, just as dividing miles by hours yields mile per hour. So 1 is an adverb modification. 2 is a verb, an action. 3 is an adjective, a color, an illusion, or a fiction. You combine an adverb and a verb. Again, a verb could be, let's say, sitting. You're sitting down. An adverb would be she's sitting, he's sitting, they are sitting. When we're getting into it nitty gritty, when you're modifying a verb, what we're doing is we're thinking of things in terms of what's happening now, in now time. You have never existed in a period other than now. From this, when you were a child, if you're 40 years old now, I don't know how old every one of the viewers are, but every second that you have been alive, you have always been in right now. It's never been any other time than right now. We have an illusion of time, but it's always been now. You would say right now, then you would say right now, yesterday, because it was then, not now. So it's looking at things in terms of what is happening right now. And that is what it means by coloring these things. For instance, if you were running, you would, yeah, you said you were late because mile per hour does not exist. There it is. So when you're modifying something, you're coloring it with opinion. Let me put it to you this way. And in terms of an adjective, the sky is blue. So you have the sky and you're describing it using an adjective. Somebody else could say, no, I don't think it is blue. I think it's actually more of like an aqua color. Maybe it's teal. It's light blue, but it's not blue. So we could disagree. We could have a loss of information because you experienced it one way, and perhaps you liked the way it looked, so you wanted to tell somebody else. You're trying to communicate this feeling that you have, but you can only do it using words. You can't have them experience it as if they were you. So when you combine an adverb, when you color or answer one of the 5 questions, the who, what, when, where, or why, for a verb, that's an adverb. Speaking of, I actually did, I did remember too, I think I put adjectives and adverbs. An adjective describes someone or something. In terms of grammar, it modifies a noun or a pronoun. Examples of adjectives are green, wet, and European. An adverb describes an action, or it further describes a description. It modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. So it's not just modification of a verb. It is kind of flexible because it is in the syntax. For instance, if you learn Latin or certain, like, the reason that it's hard to learn, like, Mandarin, I think German as well, is because, and Latin, that's why I said Latin, but in English, the boy threw the ball to the girl. The reason that we understand what's going on in that picture in our mind is because of the order of the words. Okay, the girl threw the ball to the boy. I switched the position, and now there's something else going on there. In Latin and like Mandarin, China, I'm not sure with like the Asian Eastern languages as much. I've never really tried to look into those, but I know Latin, I know German. There's probably a few other languages that does. I think Russian does it as well. But those nouns will derive different meanings based on the ending of the word. So for instance, in Latin, you have the word for God is deus or deo or deum. So deus, deum, deum, deo, from God, in the name of God, or to God. It's kind of, these are called the nominative generative cases, and it derives that meaning from the ending prefix of the word. That's called noun declension. It's called declining a noun. And so, yeah, language is very advanced, and that's why it's easy to manipulate people using this manipulation of language. That's why they're able to do it so well with ideas such as spell casting. Let me just see what, I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to read a few little parts of it. Yeah, let me zoom in here. Placements. An adjective may go just before a noun, or before the noun that it modifies, such as a yellow bird appeared. This is called an attributive adjective. Or it may follow a linking verb. The bird was yellow. This is called a predicate adjective. Contrary to the syntax of many languages, in English, we would not be likely to speak of a bird yellow. Normally, an adjective does not immediately follow the noun it modifies. Exceptions are found in poetry, for instance. Thy spirit with its life intense and mild. Where to put adverbs often perplexes people. Typically, an adverb goes just before a simple verb, such as they often bring flowers. Often function as a adjective because bringing flowers, some arbitrary person, like a stick figure person, because you don't have details to color in yet, is delivering bringing flowers. That is the verb. So often it tells you, okay, well, this is how they're doing it, you know, very frequently. It's answering a question about this action, so often functions as an adverb. It may go at the beginning of a sentence or a clause or at the end, particularly if it gets emphasis. Unfortunately, she failed. The river is rising rapidly. The placement, again, sorry, unfortunately, she failed. Unfortunately was the adverb. And the river is rising rapidly. Rapidly is the adverb. Did I say adverb the first time? It's adverb in both cases. Because we're dealing with, well, I guess, yeah, it is an adverb. Because some person failed. Unfortunately, she failed. Well, maybe that was an adjective. That's what I was confused about. I think that one of them was an adjective, one of them was a adverb. Because they're telling us that both you can do this interchangeably. Yeah, because to fail something is a verb, so I guess unfortunately was an adjective because she failed and you feel sorry about it. So unfortunately, yeah, so that's an adjective. Unfortunately, she failed. Unfortunately is an adjective. Okay, the river is rising rapidly. So to rise is an action. It's rising and it's doing it fast, rapidly. They got me tripped up for a second. It tripped me up too bad. I'm sorry. Okay, the placement of an adverb can drastically affect the meaning of a sentence such as this one. A plan for reducing the workforce slowly has been prepared. Again, it can affect the meaning of a sentence, and that's where all of these little tricks come in, and that's why we're paying attention to how adverbs modify verbs. Put it this way, you're not talking about other people's actions. You're, in terms of this quantum grammar, you're looking at literally what are you doing right now. You're running right now, and you like tell yourself in your head, I'm running right now, this is what I'm doing. So to say she is running creates an imaginary person that's not you. Who is this she person? Do they really exist? Are they an AI? Am I talking to AI now? It's like, you know, could imagine, it's just an imaginary person. It's not you, it's somebody else. And when you're using it in language, you do have an image in your mind. We called that the phantasm a couple episodes back, the representation of the sensory input. So that's what it means when it says, or what David Wynn Miller means when he says it creates a fiction or a void. You're not doing that. That is we're using a hypothetical stage of sorts to communicate. And so it's like I'm using language to paint an image in your mind. So that's why I like that, you know, silence is where your thoughts occur. And so if you're paying attention to me, you're giving me access to your stage of silence. And it's like you're letting me put on a little show on the stage of silent. Maybe think of like a window or something. It's like somebody's moving around in the window, like a box window of the store. It's a stage, and I'm trying to communicate through words something that's in my mind to you, but I can only do it through a medium, which is the message. So maybe that's what he meant. Maybe he was trying to tell us it was words. Words are the message. Let's see. The sentence is ambiguous. Does it refer to a plan for slowly reducing the workforce, or does it mean that the plan has slowly been prepared? Again, it said a plan for reducing the workforce slowly has been prepared. A plan for reducing the workforce slowly has been prepared. See, it's in the intonation. There's something about the intonation. That's why it's ambiguous. So does it mean that the plan has been slowly prepared? Or does it mean that a plan for slowly reducing the workforce has been prepared? If an auxiliary is helping the verb, it is perfectly proper for the adverb to go between them. We will soon know the results. We will. When will we? Soon. I hope you guys are picking up on there's almost like a resulting question. So it is meant to go as like a conversation. So it's like when somebody comes up to you and they say something and you have all these questions in your mind, you're trying to fill in the details. And so that's why I had to bring up this idea of generating, because what we're doing in terms of behavior, it is generated into language. So we're going to get into that in a moment. Yeah, we will soon know the results. Soon is the adverb because we will know it soon. Another example, his support would quickly vanish. Vanish is the verb. When is this thing going to vanish? Well, it's going to vanish pretty quickly. Some writers have mistaken notion that an adverb cannot split a verb phrase, such as will know or would vanish. The notion seems to stem from the concern about split infinitives. A news story said, quote, her family's home was badly damaged, unquote. The sentence structure has a Germanic flavor. Telling the story orally, the writer would probably say her family's home was badly damaged. Similarly, a news story in another paper said, quote, the stadium measure heavily was favored. Better would have been the stadium measure was heavily favored. An author wrote, I have no great objection to its Cockney being denied officially the status of Dialect. Cockney is interesting. I actually know what that is. Cockney is like a very heavily British. It's interesting. There's no real way to describe it. It's this heavy British accent, but you can replace words for like certain verbs in some senses. You will always be welcome in our house. Here the adverb applies to the whole compound, will be welcome, and follows the first auxiliary will. He will be sharply reprimanded. Here the adverb specially applies to the main verb, reprimanded, and goes right before it. When in doubt, one can play it by ear. There it was. If it sounds right, it is likely to be right. An adverb is made up of a number of words, an adverb made up of a number of words often follows a verb phrase. I have said it again and again. When it comes to at the beginning, an adverb can modify an entire sentence or clause. Usually, she arrives early and bakes the bread. Usually applies to both arrives and bakes. So, just wanted to make sure people they understood what an adverb was. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, so in terms of how are these numerical operations working? When you combine an adverb and a verb, you synthesize an adjective, because he says that it's an opinion, effectively. It's not a fact, it's an opinion. Okay. Running. She's running. No, maybe that's a guy. You never know in 2026. That might be a dude. So it's an opinion now, which means that's an adjective. You're describing something. It's not absolute fact. That's an illusion. Pretty much, this countering of an argument by saying that's not what I meant. That is why when you combine an adverb and a verb, you're synthesizing an adjective. That's according to David Wynn Miller's system, the foundation of this system. That is an illusion. So that's why he's saying 1 plus 2 is 3. He derived the meaning of the numbers by looking at this almost motion of a sentence. As he explains, David Wynn Miller explains, the secret to correcting the math of the matrix is by doing the math backwards. The system establishes an equation, like x plus 2 is 3. To find x, the truth, you must run the operation in reverse. So 3 take 2 is 1, revealing that 1 is x. If a lawyer or a judge structures a sentence using forward multiplication, x times 2 is 6, you must divide it backwards. 6 by 3 is 2 to prove the syntax. This is time reversal symmetry, a palindrome. This is why when you look at DNA, it's that, it twists. It's because it goes forward and then backwards, and it goes up the other side backwards. That's a palindrome. So when you can spell something forwards and you can spell it backwards, that they're palindromic. There's a technology, a real, very real technology called CRISPR DNA editing. CRISPR is a what's it called? Well, the letters stand for something. It's an acronym. Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. CRISPR, DNA editing, gene editing technology. You should look into CRISPR if you haven't. It's crazy. But, yeah. It's time reversal symmetry, a palindrome. If the words do not mathematically balance forwards and backwards, the sentence is a perjury. We did look at this. 3 is an adjective, strictly defined as a color of fiction, an illusion, art, imagination, void. It colors something. Because again, there's space for disagreement. If you're talking about what you are doing now, right now, you think up something in terms of language. That's how you communicate it. But it's, for all intents and purposes, imaginary. Yeah, so when you start to put these together, if you put two adjectives next to each other, it doesn't make sense. Multiplying them together, allowing them to change or edit each other in terms of, sentence structure. You're creating, a type of illusion and squaring it. That's the best way that I could describe it. Yeah, that's where you get the double something, double meaning, a double think, double speak, a self-referential matrix of pure hallucination. Put it this way: if I, said something with innuendo, it leaves the person to wonder, did he actually say that, or am I just crazy? And that's what I'm trying to articulate here. Sometimes these are called reality tunnels. That's another concept. We've also referred to the same thing as a spell. Let's see if I have that. Let me put that up there really quickly. A spell would probably, I should put that up. Trying to get to where I'm at. Yes, right here. Spell is a form of mind control that acts like a pair of glasses. It bends the target's worldview until the sorcerer's implanted mythology becomes their mental proof of reality, regardless of external facts. What are the three parts of one? Doublespeak and plausible deniability, repetition and circularly reasoned logic, because repetition is the most basic form of mind control, and enough recognizable truth for the mind to suspend disbelief. Enough sugar to make the medicine go down. That's how, you can get up and you can give a speech, all these politicians give a speech, and people really think that they mean one thing, but you know, if you read the subtext of what they're saying, it's not what they mean. The human biocomputer is trapped in a closed loop system defined by Robert Anton Wilson as the thinker and the prover. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. To distinguish reality from fantasy, the brain relies on an internal reality strategy. Because the brain uses the exact same neural cells to represent or represent both a real memory and a complete hallucination, it has no objective way to tell the difference. Instead, it tests the data against subjective internal criteria, submodalities, and the brightness of a mental picture, the volume of the internal voice, or intensity of the physical feeling. If a fictional concept, like an ideology, a political identity, or a nominalized emotion, is cross-referenced across multiple sensory input channels, you can see the concept, hear the words describing it, and feel a physical sensation associated with it. Your reality strategy validates it. The system says this passes the test and therefore it is real. The fiction is fully materialized into the host's nervous system. So what is it? Where is the fraud coming from? What is it that we fail to see? The specific fatal error that convinces the human race that fiction is reality is the failure to distinguish the map from the territory. Gregory Bateson exposes the absolute mechanism of this cognitive trap. The perceiver shall perceive only the product of his perceiving act. He shall not perceive the means by which that product was created. Again, the perceiver shall perceive only the product of his perceiving act. He shall not perceive the means by which that product was created. The unconscious epistemology, that being the how of our senses, is deeply concealed, stepping between our conscious understanding and the external world to make us absolutely sure of the reality of our illusions. When you look at a blue book, you believe the blue is in the book. But as the philosopher Hans Weininger notes, blue is merely the name we give to our internal sensation of a specific light frequency. Though then commits a severe error. It hypostatizes the sensation, inventing a thing. It's not hypothesize because that's in terms of thinking, but hypostatizes is in terms of sensation. Inventing a thing, that being a book, to which the sensation blue is supposed to adhere to as an attribute. As Weininger brutally concludes, this thing is a fiction. The attribute as such is a fiction, and the whole relationship is a fiction. You know, it's a blue book. When you look at a blue book, you believe the blue is in the book. But he says, Weininger says, blue is merely the name we give to our internal sensation of a specific light frequency. You commit a severe error. Thought then commits a severe error. It hypostatizes the sensation, inventing a thing, the book, to which the sensation blue is supposed to adhere to as an attribute. As Weininger brutally concludes, it's a fiction. Because what's saying there is that the only reason something is blue is because the light reflects off of it in a manner in which your brain recognizes as blue. Because this is a biological process. When you start to look into the eyes and all of the five senses, in terms of hearing, you have three little smallest bones in your body that literally act like a little drum, and that's how you hear things. So it's very fascinating. We fail to recognize that we are the authors of the projection. So your language is what creates the projection. Because you know, when you think a thought, you do it in terms of language. So we fail to recognize that we're the authors of the projection. We take the internal images, words, and concepts generated by our own neurology, and we project them outward. We hallucinate that they exist independently, quote unquote, out there, because we cannot see the biological and linguistic machinery projecting the hologram. We are forced to believe the hologram is the universe. So what is being meant by that is that, I'm trying to think of the best, like, a way to phrase it. Because you can't see what is creating, it's like you have these biological senses, and you have, you know, the spinal cord, and you have the, you know, the lenses of the eyes, and that has to do with being picked up, you know, by different parts, different specific regions of the brain. I remember we had to do these little maps in psychology, and you're not literally seeing that like process come together in the sense of a machine. You just experience reality. You don't have to do much work, I guess, is another way to put it that way. So what this is saying is that you kind of get immersed in that created image. And that's not to necessarily say what you think is real is real. And that's why I've said many times, the difference between fact and fiction is that fiction has to make sense. Somebody said that in my comments. I can't remember who it was. Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it here, and we're going to do these slides tomorrow, because that was pretty much the first half of the presentation. That was not designed to be the whole presentation of the system, because I could not have done it in a single episode. That was meant to kind of lay some of the groundwork for it, as a matter of fact, because I do recognize that grammar and stuff like that is very advanced, and I want to do it in such a way that it's very simple. And I have to, that's where I factor into the process, where I actually am learning by doing that. That is how I am engaging the process of learning the material. It's because I'm trying to communicate it to, you know, for all intents and purposes, the people who haven't read like all of the books on the topic. I mean, the people who haven't done any of the background, I'm trying to explain content without, you know, 90% of the content, because I'm using, you know, excerpts and, you know, little presenter pieces and stuff like that. I have to almost compress the information down. I have to figure out how to represent these complex philosophical things in terms of language. And so we're going to cover that in more detail. So don't think, you know, there's still pieces missing, because that is, as a matter of fact, I've been trying to put a lot of information into this, and so sometimes I will, like I said, have to do cut it tonight and continue tomorrow. But I actually was planning to do all of this, so there is still some stuff out of joint, and we're going to dig into this some more, because it's very fascinating. It's looking at things in terms of what's going on right now, and the reason that pertains to artificial intelligence is because that is how artificial intelligence sees, but arguably that's how preternatural angels and demons see because they don't live in the constraints of time. And so when you're going to have everybody hooked up to an AI and you want to feed a script, you know, here you don't want to give a Democrat and a Republican a different, you don't want to have to give these people one script and these people another script. They want to not have to pay for two different versions of the same propaganda. They want everybody to see one thing. And that's going to be through digital currencies. But to manage such a system, you're going to have to give it to the supervisor or the daemon, the flow control, Moloch packet sniffing software, a flow control software. You have to do it now. Like, it's all doing it in now time. And so what it does is it takes the past and the future out of language. You're not allowed to use the past and the future in David Wynn Miller's system. There is no past and there is no future because, as I said, and he said as well in some of the lectures, you've never lived in the past or the future. You've always lived in right now. He said it better, and I wish I could remember how he said it. He said, I'm going to find that quote because he said it in a way that was great. We've always lived in right now. And I know that we all do have a past and there is a concept of a future, but technically you've never actually been there. You've always been in the position of right now. Somebody could say, you know, what are you doing right now? And they could say at any point in history, it would only have applied to that point. But all those people only said right now. And so that's what it's trying to do. And that's the connection to AI. It's trying to get rid of all of the opinions, all of the coloring of fact. It's the idea that the grammar is going to be set up in almost a programmatical way for this thing, of that, with this, by that. We're going to put together a sentence in such a way that you would read it or say it, and there would be minimal questions left in terms of context. You would answer a lot of those context clues, context questions that arise normally in conversation. You would answer those in probably what would come off a bit clunky, but it's not necessarily about you have to go out and speak this language. That's not what this is about. No, this is about almost modeling the mechanics of what you're experiencing, because you experience those things through your senses in a type of language. You know, some people apparently don't have inner monologues. However, you know, I don't have the, I mean, I do have it, so I don't have that experience to be able to compare it. However, they have to still do the same process that we do, where they have a thought and they have to tell us, you know, what, this is what I'm thinking or doing. So they're able to communicate in that way, which means there must be some type of difference, but I'm not able to articulate it right now. But that's the idea. The idea is to break down the syntax, the way that these things go together, the words go together, for people to maybe come away, you know, honestly, I would consider it a win if, you know, you, the viewer, just, if you think, if it pops back up in your head, start asking yourself when you hear somebody talking, or when you just look for the adverb, look for the adjective, and ask yourself, what is it? What is it? How is it changing the verb? And if you do that, then man, you definitely learn something. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to teach you like a language that you have to go out and speak or like write in. No, and I think that's where a lot of people might take this subject and they go in a different direction. But this is an analytical framework for understanding how does language affect our reality, not well, our perception of it, but how does our language affect our perception of reality, which then becomes our reality? So that will be what we're going to cover. I will be with you tomorrow, and James should be back Tuesday, but I'm going to do some stuff on this topic as well, because I think it's interesting. I think it's very fascinating. Although it's a level of higher level topic, I understand. This is, I should have mentioned earlier, but this is the idea that where James calls them soul contracts, breath contracts. And literally, if you're talking to somebody using words, it is literally a breath contract. But we're going to get into it more. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please hit the like button. Please follow the channel wherever you're at. If you're on YouTube, or if you're on James' channel, please hit the follow button, the like button on James's video, especially if I did a good job as your guest host. I appreciate that. But on any of my profiles, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. It really does help the video for, more people seeing it, and my listings getting boosted in the various algorithms, even though I kind of have to scoff at that myself, because I'm not getting boosted in any of the algorithms. I'm a type of ghost on certain platforms, but I'll see everybody in the next episode. Have a good night, guys. Take care.